Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Mark Sleboda, and we're going to talk about the what's happening, the Israeli attack on Iran. But I've got some questions for Mark as to, from the perspective of Moscow, from the perspective of the Kremlin, etc. What they may glean from this particular act. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Mark Sleboda. And Mark, by the way, people can find you online and all that good stuff now. I understand you have a new landing site that we need to let people know about.
Yes, you can follow me and support me in the sanctions-proof Boosty, the Realpolitik on Boosty. That's not Busty, that's Boosty, like as in to boost. Boosty. So if you follow the Realpolitik or just Mark Sleboda on Boosty, and it will pop up for you. And you can follow me there. There is exclusive content out for my subscribers, and there's also the possibility for all kinds of cool interactions, a Discord channel, everything. So if you for some reason like to suffer with me, well then if you're a glutton for punishment, you can get even more me if you support me there.
Awesome. All right, let's start. So I'm going to throw my first question at you, Mark, because when I thought Mark Sleboda, the first thing I thought was, okay, you're looking at this, and not that, first of all, you are in fact a professional cynic, not an amateur. So nothing changed for you. It was like, okay, yeah, this is what I expect from the empire, and to some extent, I can be there. But this whole we're negotiating with, if you recall this, when they killed Soleimani, what was under the guise of, hey, we want to negotiate with you, we killed them, right? Yep. Hey, we're going to negotiate with them. It was obviously they were faking out the Iranians so they could set them up for attack. Hey, let's negotiate with the Russians because I think I can get a deal with them. Who the hell would negotiate with these fascist lunatics? Anyway, Mark, go ahead.
So first of all, by the way, I love the hat. Love the hat.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the current carnage in the Middle East. So, I mean, we've got Trump doing his, I've got nothing to do with this act, or at least some officials on his behalf, and out the other side on his own, he's like, this is excellent. I warned the Iranians. They had 61 days. This is 61 days. There will be death. Everyone will be dead unless they come to the deal. His standard mafia breaking tactics.
Yep.
But so there was supposed to be another round of U.S.-Iranian negotiations this weekend. Witkoff was supposed to meet them in Tehran, right? So now Axios is telling us, and the Israelis are loudly trumpeting the same thing, that this was all a ruse, that Trump was in on it all along, that this was to lull the Iranians for some reason into a false sense of, to lull them into a false sense of complacency as Israel ramped up for the attacks. And it seems to have worked. It really seems to have worked, because everything I have seen so far, and admittedly, there's a lot of fog of war. We're hearing more from one side than the other, but sounds like Iran's getting mauled. I got to say that. And it seems like they were extremely unprepared. And I do not understand this, because was it not just, 2-3 months ago that the Ayatollah, right, the supreme leader Khomeini, said there is no point to negotiate with the Americans. Nothing good can come of it. They are never honest in diplomacy. And that was later echoed by the even wannabe pro-Western Iranian president, right, elected on a reform platform to improve relations with the West. You naive F. All right. He himself then echoed the same thing, that there's no point to negotiation with the Americans. And they began negotiations with the Americans. And in the last week, right, we had the U.S. order its diplomatic and military personnel to evacuate non-essential staff and their families out of the Middle East, right? Out of Iraq, the embassies there, out of military bases all across the Middle East. And it was just a week ago that Donald Trump ordered the delivery of some 20,000 kind of jury-rigged, supposed small anti-drone missiles. These are old dumb missiles that are supposed to have a guidance kit attached to them to transform them into anti-drone short-range, like an air defense missile. And they were supposed to go to the Kiev regime in Ukraine. That's what Biden had them made for. But we just found out last week that they were being sent to the Middle East instead. Now we know why. But there's so many signals out there, right? And yet, Israel began their attack last night with a major decapitation strike. Major, right? They took out the head of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? Their principal, their real military. They took out the head of the aerospace forces of the IRGC, i.e. the guy who would be in charge of air defense and possibly the long-range strike retribution as well, right? They took out 2 or 3, depending on your counts, of Iran's top civilian nuclear scientists who were working on their civilian nuclear power program, and other generals, right? The IRGC chief of general staff was killed as well, and that's only the top of the list. They did not seem to get the president or the supreme leader yet, right? But this began from within and without, right? I've long said that the biggest threat to Iran is not outside airstrikes, but the internal Mossad and, to a lesser extent, CIA and MI6 penetration of Iranian society.
If I may, and I got to throw this in. It immediately came to my attention. Was it 2 weeks ago that they did these drone attacks from inside of Russia? And people said, I had heard CIA Mossad, right? And the supposed, as I understand it, the attacks on the killing the people were like drone attacks on their houses and apartments and stuff. Same thing. That what they did was this, and let me throw this at the exact same thing that they did in Russia. They were doing it in Ukraine. The word is, they were doing it in Israel. The word is, it started during the Biden administration, and one could look at it and say they were running the 2 exact same operations at the same time. No doubt the same people were doing it involved. It was the exact same operation, 2 places, the same time.
Yeah, we don't know all the details yet, but it seems like there may have at least been a very similar playbook. Right?
Yeah.
So, container warfare has been theorized. Like, I've read military journal reports saying that essentially every major country has this already prepared, containers full of either missiles or drones, right? Missiles in a box, drone in a box, right? Because of, the potential. But to have them unleashed in such a short time period within each other by the same geopolitical forces, that's got to raise some alarm bells, some questions. So Mossad has Iran thoroughly penetrated. We saw that when they assassinated the political leader of Hamas at the inauguration of Pezeshkian, right? For people who remember that. They regularly assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists and officials practically at will, right? This is going back years. They regularly sabotage Iran's gas pipelines. That's something that occurs. Mossad has whole networks, not only of their own agents, right? Sympathizers within Iran,
MEK,
mercenaries, separatists, terrorists, right? Just a whole grab bag of people. They have them quite well organized and quite penetrating of Iranian society. And as you mentioned, the initial reports are that along with a spate of assassinations and bombings and small arms attacks on air defense stations and the like, another thing that they did was they launched drones from inside Iran, right? I've heard mention of essentially a drone base, an Israeli drone base inside Iran. And I haven't seen a specific mention of trucks, with cargo containers, but that seems very likely to me as well, right? There's obviously, multiple vectors they were using this. So as they were conducting airstrikes, and these airstrikes, first of all, extremely facilitated by the overthrow of the Syrian government, because now they no longer had to worry about Syrian air defense, right? Now with Al-Qaeda, West-backed Al-Qaeda in charge at West and Turkey-backed Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria. Syria has no air defense. It wouldn't fire on the Israelis if it did. So that brings them right up. And obviously Iraq, the government in Iraq has been cowed and beat into submission because most of the Israeli strikes that we know of, I haven't seen any confirmation that they actually entered Iranian airspace.
Right. They flew.
So they're firing long range out of Iraqi airspace after traveling through, and I've seen them refueling over Syrian airspace, right? Because of and I heard mention already hours ago of some 330 strikes involving 200 aircraft, F-15s, F-16s, and F-35s. So first, there was combined assaults inside and out. And the first thing that they went for was radar, right? That they went for radar, anything that would a part of their air defense early warning system. And then almost immediately after that, they launched simultaneous attacks at air defense stations, right? Again, from both within and out, right? Outside airstrikes, SEAD, right? The suppression of enemy air defense, right? But also these drone attacks and possibly other attacks from within. And at the same time, they were already conducting a decapitation strike, going through a combination of outside strikes and inside assassinations against the leaders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, top nuclear scientists. I'm sure we first of all, I'm sure we only know the tip of the iceberg at this point. And it's very likely that they also went after others, like political leaders, like the Ayatollah, but we haven't heard any success there. But the fact that so many top IRGC commanders were so unprepared and so easily and quickly taken out, that does not speak of them reading the quite obvious tea leaves over the last week very well. And it seems that they were lulled by this game where Trump was pretending to continue with negotiations, where at least the Israelis are telling us. And Trump has said nothing that contradicts this, right? He's excellent job. No one has ever backed Israel like we have, and so this pretense, we weren't involved, don't you dare strike us. He also said, by the way, that they will defend Israel. Well, of course they will. right, against any Iranian retaliation. So don't you dare strike back after my boy Israel has popped you a good one. Then we saw attacks on nuclear facilities across Iran, right? Natanz, evidently, there has been an open question that perhaps the Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities for their civilian nuclear power program are so deep, right? The centrifuges and stuff so deep that nothing, that was, even the U.S. didn't have the penetrative power to get at them. Well, we don't know for certain, but the International Atomic Energy Agency is already reporting that there is a radiation leak in what used to be the Iranian nuclear facilities at Natanz, and there's already an effort to deal with contamination. So that would seem to indicate to me, to at least some extent, they did damage. And I've seen repeated bombings of ballistic and nuclear facilities at Tabriz, just nearly constant. So, I mean, this is going on all over. And the Israelis have made clear this is just the beginning, right? I've heard that they plan to continue this operation, at least the initial plan was for 14 days, right? This is just the beginning.
It's
the
US, it's a U.S. declaration of war. I mean, you can say Israel all you want to, we gave them all of these weapons. We did all of that. We refueled it. We do this. They're flying U.S. planes. They're shooting U.S. back. It's a U.S. declaration of war on Iran is what it is. And it is a U.S. declaration of war having not gone through Congress. Thus
far, it is being farmed out to Israel for the most part. But there's certain things that there's unquestioned. The U.S. has been refueling Israeli planes, right, in flight, in air refueling over Syria and Iraq. They obviously provided the satellite and other intelligence needed to conduct a lot of these attacks. And there's also pretty much no question that they're going to be restocking Israel with bunker busters and everything else needed to carry out the attack.
Which they gave them in the first place. And what kind of planes are they flying? U.S. You know what I mean? And anybody think the CIA wasn't involved?
The U.S. is now moving aircraft carrier groups into the region. So the Carl Vinson.
It's a U.S. attack. It's a U.S. They used. It's a Ukraine is the U.S. is a U.S. proxy to they used. This is proxy. Implausible deniability proxy war is all this is to me. That's my opinion.
The other thing they quite obviously went after is Iran's offensive capabilities, right? They went now. My understanding is that a lot of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities are distributed and mobile, like many
right, like Yemen, only on a larger scale.
Yeah, so there's an open question that we will find out in the coming hours and days how much of Iran's supposedly quite large and formidable long-range strike capability, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, supposedly, lots of drones, all different types of drones. It remains to be seen how much of that has survived Israel's first attack. I would say substantial, but the longer they wait to reply, the more chance Israel will have to take out their potential offensive, reply assets, right? There is obviously they want to calibrate a response, but as far as I'm concerned, they should already have a calibrated response for scenarios like this. It should be a part of their normal military preparedness, and they should be able to pull a response out of the box that is appropriate and act on it. And even with a decapitation strike that took out so many IRGC commanders, replacements have already been ordered. I mean, but to this moment, I have not seen or heard any confirmation of any Iranian response against Israel or retaliation.
Exactly. Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I've heard some drones being sent towards Israel out of Iraq. But I would suspect that's more than likely, if we're talking small drones, and that's more likely Kataib Hezbollah than it is Iran per se.
Yeah.
But Iran's in a bad place here, multiple ways. The axis of resistance has just been mauled over the last year, right? Hezbollah had a not completely dissimilar and even more extensive decapitation strike against their own leadership, followed up by a military campaign. Hezbollah is in bad shape. Syria is gone. The Syrian government is gone. It's now Al-Qaedastan, right? Or ISIS, the Islamic State reborn, however you want to term it, considering that al-Julani was previously the head of both Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. That's another ally gone. The Houthis are still kicking, but they've been bombed by the United States and Israel, it must be said, pretty extensively over the last 2 months. So at the moment, their capabilities may be less than usual. And Hamas is still surviving, but the people of Gaza are literally facing
extermination
by starvation.
Yep.
Like right now. I mean, there's no way that the pittance, the aid that Israel is allowing through is like 5% of Gaza's daily requirements, right? Or 5 or 10%, something like that. So people are literally dying.
Yeah, it's an extermination camp. It's just, I mean, when you look at it and you say, I put somebody in a room and I say, you can't leave that room. I block off all the exits. I won't let food come in the room. I won't let water come in the room. And I'll just keep shooting in the room. That's extermination. It is a U.S. Israel extermination camp is what it is. And it looks like they intend on just exterminating literally a Holocaust style extermination.
So my point is that Iran doesn't have many of its axis of resistance allies that it is able to call upon right now, certainly not in fighting form. And that is after Iran declined, after Israeli attacks on each one of them, to really lift a finger so much in their defense that I could see. So Iran is in a bad situation. Now, Russia has already condemned the attacks. They have done the usual diplomatic thing of calling for restraint on both sides, as if, right? And supposedly Netanyahu's on the phone with half the world's leaders today. One of those is supposed to be a phone call with Putin. Now, Russia and Iran have a newly strengthened and deepened strategic partnership, by which many presume Russia is to begin the work of building up Iran a far more integrated, interconnected, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare system. But that's something that, of course, takes years to build. There's no time for that now, quite obviously. I find it very likely that Russia will provide help to Iran, but you're not going to see Russian troops or Russian aircraft or Russian drones, anything like that. It will be satellite intelligence, right? It will be possibly, depending on how long it lasts, the provision of weapons, air defense missiles, perhaps even air defense systems, and the like. Certainly, we can expect that Russia will help Iran at least to the same extent that Iran has helped Russia in Ukraine, which is the provision of the Shahed 136, the designs, the licensing, that sort of thing. But, possibly some other things as well. I would actually expect Russian help here to be much more severe. Now, the important thing for Russia and China is to make sure that the Iranian government survives. Because while the ostensible reason for these attacks is attacks on nuclear facilities, because Iran was only now minutes away from building a nuclear bomb, which has been Israel's cry since 1984. 1984, Israeli newspapers, Iran only a short time away from building a nuclear bomb. Netanyahu himself has been yelling about it publicly since 1992 himself, right? So, take all that with a grain of salt. Both U.S. intelligence and the International Atomic Energy Agency tells us that Iran has no active weapons program. And if they enrich uranium, they are entitled to do that under international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? As signatories to it. They are entitled to that right. Now, does that give them what could be considered breakout capability? Yes, but every country, right, with a civilian nuclear power program has that. But Iran's not allowed it because Israel, right? I mean, that's the story. Even though Israel actually has, nominally illicit nuclear weapons and quite a small inventory of them as well, provided with Western assistance. Now, from a Russian perspective, let's take from a Russian politicalist perspective, the important thing, and Chinese, is that the Iranian government survives, and the primary goal of the U.S. and Israel here is going to be regime change, right? That's what they're really after, regime change, which is going to be very difficult for them to do, just with the pressure of long-range strikes and whatever forces they can mobilize on the ground that will still, be ready. They're not going to invade Iran. That's not in the cards. But they're going to attempt to destabilize Iranian society and activate Mossad and CIA operatives to such an extent. Will that be successful? I don't think so, but we're going to have to find out. One of the things we're going to have to find out is how much of its long-range strike retaliation capability Iran has left after this. I would presume significant, but we don't know that for certain.
And what will their decision be? What will they decide to do to retaliate? Because I agree with you. My position now is, I'll put it like this. If your intent is to, in a war or in a military confrontation, to achieve a specific goal, and you do not achieve that specific goal, you do not win. War is what is, the whole von Clausewitz. I got something I want to accomplish. There's a military confrontation. Afterwards, I didn't accomplish my goal. I didn't win. Because this is really, like you said, they know as well as I do where Iran is technologically and everything else. It's all a fraud so that they can try to do the regime change. The whole Wesley Clark 7 countries thing. Everybody knows that. And if they don't get the regime change, which, as you said, ain't going to be easy with long-term strikes, they don't win. While you wake up the next morning and you said they had a lot of successful hits. Fair enough. But none of this stuff is short term. And in the long term, 2 months, 6 months, a year from now, you look back, what happened as a result of that? You know what I'm saying? And we all get emotional the first day. I remember the first day of the military, of the SMO. Man, I was like the first couple, I was on pins and needles. And then something happens. If you remember the infamous counter, what was it called? Where like Russia walked out of a couple cities and they walked in and they said, we took everything back. It's over. And people flipped out and said, that's it. Russia's lost. And Russia kind of moved along slowly and blah, blah, blah. So this is a long game and we get emotional at particular points, but it's kind of hard to guess as to where it's going to go. And as you said, if the goal is regime change and you don't achieve regime change.
Okay. So we don't know. Different motivations. So Netanyahu's primary motivation is to bring the U.S. directly into war with Iran. Yes. The U.S. place. I mean, that's long been. They've assassinated the leader of Hamas inside Tehran. They conduct strikes on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. They've done terrorism attacks on Iranian gas pipelines. They've conducted assassinations. They haven't gotten the reaction they wanted, possibly until now. Right now, it may be impossible to ignore. Now, from the Iranian side, the primary goal here is government survival of their government and way of life. A second priority is to hit Israel back enough that it serves as a deterrent against immediate or near future attacks. Right? That's their secondary goal. If they can, assuming they can achieve the first one, then the second one takes a priority. The United States, obviously, to some degree, they want regime change in Iran. At the very least, they want a severely weakened Iran out of this. I don't believe they're really. The irony, of course, all of this is if I'm sitting in Tehran, the lesson I learned out of this is if I don't have a nuclear weapon, they're going to keep attacking me.
Yeah. Kim Jong, North Korea. That's a lesson you learn. Everybody learns North Korea.
Yep. So Iraq didn't have a nuclear weapon. The U.S. said they did. They get rid of them. Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon program and got attacked. Libya gave up a chemical weapons program, and Gaddafi met the horrible end that we're all aware of. The only one hanging there is North Korea because they actually built a nuclear weapon. So John Mearsheimer has said that Iran developing a nuclear weapon would be the most geopolitically stabilizing thing for the entire Middle East. And it's hard to argue with that. I mean, obviously, that's not a view from the U.S.-Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. And by the way, the other wing of their tripod, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia does not appear to be, at least publicly, on board with this at all. Saudi Arabia put out a public statement condemning Israel's attacks as destabilizing for the region and a violation of international law. So whereas in previous decades, we might have expected Saudi Arabia to be an active participant in this, that's not the case now, at the very least. So I'm very curious about all of this because I don't think the United States is ready for this war. Principally, the U.S. military's Achilles heel right now is air defense missiles. We're talking principally Patriot interceptors, but other types as well. They were already short of Patriot interceptors before the conflict in Ukraine started, simply because of Saudi expenditure of them in its ill-fated attempt to take over Yemen, right? Their war against Ar Salah, which they gave up on. They burned through a lot of Patriots there. In fact, the U.S. was forced to negotiate where other Middle East states that had the Patriot system transferred their missiles on a loan to be repaid back later basis to Saudi Arabia. And this has been talked about openly in the Western press, the Wall Street Journal even, I believe, right? So then comes the conflict in Ukraine, and we know how many Patriots, interceptors, and systems have been wasted and burned and so forth and so on now. And we'll over the last year, we had two incidences where the U.S. had to expend air defense assets to defend Israel from Iranian retaliation. And two incidences there. And there's this long-running Biden and then Trump game of whack-a-mole against the Houthis. So all of these have wasted air defense assets. Now, we know that Raytheon only makes 550 Patriot interceptor missiles a year. That's it for all the U.S. needs, for not only theirs, but all of their allies, including Ukraine and Israel to the extent that they still use the Patriot system, or the U.S. using Patriots in the Middle East on its behalf. And they hoped to ramp that up to 600, right? That's like 2 or 3 salvos of Russian missile strikes on Ukraine that occur, once or twice a month. That's nothing. So that's why I say that air defense interceptors are the U.S.'s Achilles heel. And to go into this now, when they are trying to at least de-escalate and try to maneuver Russia into a disadvantageous ceasefire in Ukraine, when their stock of these things is notorious low, is extremely surprising to me. It's extremely risky. I thought during the Biden administration, or Blinken and Sullivan administration anyway, weekend at Bernie's much, had gone out of their way to avoid conflict with Iran, right? They had these pantomime arranged attacks to save face on both sides. And my presumption at the time was, well, at least the Biden administration was well aware that they didn't have enough air defense to fight. Not that they didn't want to fight Iran, right? They didn't want to fight it now, not on those terms. And I had been assuming the same thing about the Trump administration. But obviously, they have given the green light, more than the green light. They've given assistance to Netanyahu for this, what he's been bucking for so long now. And that's going to put the U.S. in a very bad position. So, taking a step back from the official Russian statements, let's take a cold-blooded, realpolitik look, right, at this now. So, the price of oil is already rocketing up, right? I already saw it go above $70 a barrel, $72 a barrel just this morning, right? And Reuters is already predicting it could go as high as 120 or more, depending on the actions Iran takes in the Persian Gulf, right? They could shut down the whole shebang, flood it with mines and all sorts of drone attacks and everything else. That's good for Russia because that provides extra income, all across the board, right? Through the price of oil. That'd be pure profit. Secondly, the U.S. blowing through more air defense missiles, and possibly, if they get more involved, long-range strike capability now, means they have even less that could be transferred to the Kiev regime in Ukraine if that was still what they intend to do. So that's practically guaranteed. That practically first of all, that practically guarantees Russia a victory on their terms in Ukraine if the U.S. gets bogged down on this now. From a Chinese perspective, first of all, again, with Russia and China, the priority for them has got to be that the Iranian government, their partner, their ally in many terms, survives. Assuming that, then because China does get significant energy resources from Iran as well as Russia, they want that to continue. But the U.S. wasting so much military assets and in such a obviously belligerent fashion that will further turn, the real international community, right, the global South, if you want to call it, away in even further contempt and disgust and hatred from the United States. And all these military assets that they're wasting now means that the U.S. can't pivot to and provoke a conflict with China for a number of other years, depending on how involved in this the defense of Israel attacks on Iran, if it comes to that they actually get. So this has started to be a phenomenon. Kellogg, the Trump administration's, the former general, the Trump administration's envoy or babysitter for the Kiev regime in Ukraine during talks, supposedly. He's in a interview he did a couple of weeks ago. He talked about how there has to be a necessitated change of the U.S. towards more realist foreign policy, because in previous decades, right, the 90s, the early 2000s, Russia, China, and Iran, and a few others like North Korea, Syria at one point, they were all separate, right? The U.S. could act against each one of them separately. Now, however, in particular, Russia, China, and Iran, and now Russia, North Korea, and China as well, are so interconnected that it is extremely difficult for the U.S. to move against any one of them without having repercussions, right? It exposes them opportunistically to the other two. They concentrate on an economic war on Russia. Well, China and India start pumping Russian energy like there's no tomorrow, buying Russian energy like there's no tomorrow. The Trump administration threatens new bone-crushing sanctions on Russia, or more particularly, secondary sanctions on any country that dares continue trade with Russia, which means China. But wait a minute, didn't the Trump administration just cut or is in the middle of cutting a shamefaced new economic agreement, right, of sorts? The Trump administration having backed out of a tariffs war and kind of still begging for returned access to rare earths that China processes, that the Pentagon needs, and so forth. And here as well, you go after Iran, well, that is going to put back any potential conflict with China for years at the very least, giving China more and more time and ability to pump up their own defenses. And it leads to big economic revenues for Russia, right? Because the price of oil going sky high, and eventually the price of gas will follow that, and so forth and so on. And that's more expenditure of U.S. military assets. So the hegemon is having a hard time focusing on any one of Russia, China, and Iran without exposing themselves to the other two. And while still half in the foot with Russia in Ukraine and wanting desperately to pivot, which no U.S. administration has so far managed to do, to China. Everyone wants to pivot to China, but they all get bogged down in the Middle East and elsewhere. Now, with the Trump administration looking to get itself bogged down in a conflict alongside Israel with Iran, that's going to seriously provide setbacks to their goals via Russia and China. And again, Russia and China, they'll be, I don't want to say happy but it will be time for Iran to pick up some of the heavy cost and geopolitical burden of covering the hegemon. The important thing for Russia and China is just that the Iranian government survives the coming storm. Assuming that, then the geopolitical balance at the end of this will be tilted even further away from the United States and more towards the tripartite of Russia, China, Iran. Now that's a pure cold-blooded. No Russian or Chinese official is going to admit to that, right? But that's the reality.
Well, because it's a worldwide game. It's the U.S. empire is trying to maintain world hegemony. So all parts of the world, all of these things are connected. The other part is this, and I've felt this way for a long time. You want a war and a conflict to be over, and you want a victory. It benefits Russia and all of its allies, and it hurts the U.S. that the Ukraine conflict goes on as long as possible. I feel like that. The longer it goes on, the U.S. and its allies get weaker and weaker and weaker. They have to use more and more stuff. They have to send more and more stuff there, right? And Russia just gets. So there's an argument to be made now. There's other arguments to be made, but it's constant demilitarization of the West. It's keeping them occupied and busy in one place. I can make an argument that and look at the length of time, all the bad things that have happened to the West that if this was over in 3 months, these things wouldn't have happened. So anyway, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, to a large degree. And Russia is kind of unique in those circumstances because Russia is pretty much the most autarkic country on earth, meaning they are economically independent, right? They had already decoupled to such an extent and prepped their economy for a hard decoupling from the West and this war on sanctions. And they have all the resources they really need. And they had the military industrial surge capacity for this type of conflict. That has resulted in the completely unpredicted by the West result that even as they sanctioned Russia and weakened Europe, Russian economy and military industrial capacity grew. Now, not every country is in that position.
Right.
That's a number of unique factors. And part of it is the U.S. walking into a war with Russia in Russia's own backyard, right, in their stomping grounds. It was dumb, right? And then picking an economic war with the world's largest finite commodity supplier, right? That didn't work out so well, particularly for Europe on top of it. Iran's not in exactly the same position. They are a big energy supplier. It's true, gas and oil, and they've got enough resources, but they don't have the same industrial and resource capacity and other that Russia has. But to some extent, right? Not again, you're not going to see their troops fighting in Tehran or Tabriz, but Russia and China are going to have Iran's back through this economically, politically, and on a military technical level.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is. I learned from the military, from the SMO. We'll go in a couple of minutes. What I learned from the SMO was, don't be too jumpy. Don't just, okay, this happened, and don't go through these. And God knows we've all done it. These emotional roller coasters, right? Where it's like, oh God, everything's gone to hell and blah blah blah.
It's hard not to.
Yeah,
it's hard not to. I feel it myself, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And to me now, because it's like, oh, and I get the stress, and then I got to pull back the reins and say, you know what? If you're going to be a professional at figuring out what the hell's going on here, patience is the hardest thing to learn. We don't even know what and the other thing is this. Here's the other thing that I found. Me saying Iran should do this. Why aren't they doing this? You know what I mean? You see that in the chat. You see people, Iran should throw everything they can, blah, blah, immediately do this. Well, you know what? Iran has to decide based on their capabilities and based on the outcomes that they want, what they might do, where they're bluffing, where they're not. Long term, I may say that's the stupidest thing. Why didn't Iran do this? I've seen it in SMO. Why didn't Russia just XXX? And later on, I thought, well, the way things have worked out, I don't know, maybe they shouldn't have listened to me because, you know what I mean? So my immediate thing is you got to punch them back with everything you got. But sometimes people stop and go, let me think about what I should do next. And they look around and they talk to their friends and they do this. And then they make a decision. And it may not be what you want. But this is a long-term game. And you just can't get overrun with emotions. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's
I mean, we're all going to armchair this to one extent or another. And we're all going to feel an emotional, hit them back hard, but I think it's important to keep that in a degree of moderation, right? To show some self-discipline and restraint. Try to be more like Putin. Don't be Putin, right? That's impossible. But try to be a little more like Putin, right? Because the guy has ice water running through his veins, I swear to God.
Every time I hear somebody say, why doesn't Putin do this? Why doesn't he do that? And I say, when I look at everything militarily, economically, diplomatically, the tools that Russia has and the way they've played their hand, I gotta say they played a hell of a strategic hand to be in the position they are now. Yeah. Far be it for some schlump sitting here in his, you know, in a makeshift office that was once my third bedroom in my house that I just got where my desk is. Far be it for me to look at the success. Look at what Vladimir Putin, look at what Russia was in 1999 when he took over, and look at what it is now and say, I ain't got any right to tell him how to react. I don't think so. But, you know, I'm not in the chat. The chat people, he should listen to the people in the chat. They all know what he should do.
Now, of course. I mean, and people are free to have an opinion on that, right? I mean, that's part of the game. That's part of it, you know. But have a little bit of faith too, because he does have a record. Now, it's not to say that the Kremlin, that Putin hasn't made mistakes. He's himself admitted, right? I should have done something more in 2014, right? I should have, right? He's admitted some of his own. It's not to say that he doesn't make mistakes, but when you put his level of geopolitical chess up against Biden or Trump and Macron and Starmer and any other number of leaders he's played, he's been all over, you know, all over every one of their boards, you know, up and down the line, checking them pretty good over the course of, well, certainly the last few years, but really the last couple of decades.
The other thing I'll say is this, and this is my opinion. Even as I look at the Middle East and the importance of it in Iran, two things that you got to take into account. A, well, why didn't Russia do this in Syria? Why doesn't Russia do this in Iran? Why did they do more here? A, amazingly, Russia is facing the entire West and defeating them. Russia has an existential threat. Yeah, of the entire West and every vassal, everything they can muster, Pakistan stuff, every country that they can grab their stuff, throw it all in there. So it's not like they're not occupied. They can't afford to just say, all right, screw this Ukraine stuff. Let's go over here and screw around in Syria and the Middle East. They have to do that, number one. And number two, it is my belief that is the premier conflict in the world. And that's the one that decides, and that's the catastrophic defeat for NATO that decides it all, in my opinion.
That is the world order changing conflict right now. Now, this could also become, we got to see how it develops.
Yes.
This also has the potential to become, if not on the same level, but I mean, depending on how it plays out, it could also be a world order changing conflict. It's not yet, but it, you know, we'll see how it plays out. But yes, the Ukraine conflict on a geopolitical importance hierarchy, if you really care about the emergence of a multipolar world, that still takes first priority. But I mean, now this has got to be second priority. There's no question.
Yeah. All right, Mark. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Let's not forget, if I can somehow find it. There we go. This is important before we go. You want to find Mark Sleboda. You want to follow all of his stuff. And of course, guess what? On this website, you can subscribe and you can contribute and all that kind of stuff. So go to Mark's website. You can become a patron there. The Real Politique with Mark. It's at boosty.to/The Real Politique. And that's TICK. You can see it right there. With Mark Sleboda. So go there, follow Mark, all of his good stuff. He's only got 78 subscribers, and we got 1,830 people watching that. So I expect 1,830 subscribers before the end of the day, you guys. Do what you're supposed to do. Thanks a lot, everybody. Follow me on Rumble and Rockfin and all that kind of stuff. We're out.
Thanks for the shameless plug.
All right.